Hi, everybody. Whew. Welcome to the Friday night chat. Nice to see you all here. This is about honey, and I know it's a little early to be talking about honey, putting the horse before the cart here, but this is something that just came up. Someone had sent me a raw honey test, and I used it, and every honey I put in the honey test failed. And I emailed the guy and was like, yo, what's up with this? It doesn't work. And he was like, well, your honey's probably doesn't have live enzymes in it. So I did some digging to find out exactly what kills the enzymes in honey because according to him, I have been killing everything in my honey, and so has the place that I work for. So that's what we're going to be talking about real fast. I want to say thank you to sponsor of this chat, Galena Farms. They have been so great supporting my channel. So here is the website. And if you're looking for beekeeping equipment, I hope you check them out because they not only support my channel, but a lot of other people that put out education on YouTube, as opposed to some other beekeeping supply places that really just try to do their own stuff and don't support the people that are already out in the community that say whatever they want to, and it can be a little risky. You give an influencer the option to say whatever they want. They People believe them, but we also say whatever we want to, whether we like their stuff or not. I am going to be putting together one of the new hives they gave me, Eli and Ezra, which I really love. It's real wood made in Ohio by an Amish beekeeper. Speaking of which, I'm going to be talking about Amish honey today because I got some for the honey test and it failed. And that's what I said to the guy. I was like, hey, Amish people drive horse and buggy. If their honey is not raw and they're killing the enzymes in their honey, what chance do any of us stand to get this honey actually to keep it from going bad? So that's what we're going to be talking about. Feel free to include comments, questions. There's other people in the chat with a variety of backgrounds and knowledge about bees and beekeeping. Some people have been keeping bees a long time. Some people are new. And I'll get to those after we're done the honey chat. I'd love to see where everyone's from. So if you want to put it in the comments, you don't have to get specific. Country, state, whichever. Thank you to the people that like the mural. I am not done, but close. Very, very close. I'm thinking about making this wall green. Not sure. But I don't really want the rest of the room to be gray. It seems a little weird. Right now, what's going on with me, since I am in Pennsylvania and I now have to deal with beekeeping in the seasons. I can't just do whatever I want to whenever I want to, like Hawaii, where you could start beekeeping any month. I could put stuff in the ground, plant any month I wanted to. So over the weekend, I finally got around to assembling frames and building my boxes. I have a new video up. I just put out a couple days ago because I was sick last week. Still sick, actually. So please pardon my raspy voice and the occasionally sniffling and coughing I'm going to be doing. I really love that. So I finally painted my boxes, which is a little late in the year to be painting boxes. I did get paint that had low VOCs, so hopefully it won't be too stinky. And I got some books. Light reading. I've never actually read this book. I've gotten some of the old school beekeeping books, like the ABC and XYZ of beekeeping. Found it at a thrift store in Hawaii. This book and Oh, I don't have it at my desk. I got the Beekeeper's Bible, which is a book my friend got when we first got our beehives our first year over a decade ago. And it's like a big, heavy book. It's not going to teach you like how to be a beekeeper, but it has fun stuff in it, like history of beekeeping and recipes and stuff like that, along with how to keep bees. And partially, I'm just getting these books because I'm working on a new book myself. It's going to be free, but it's about how to become a beekeeper. So I'm just getting the best of a lot of the books I'm finding so that I can just expand on the book I've already made. Um, let's see. If you're not on my newsletter list, I hope you join because in my newsletter, I put up my new videos that I do, but I also add whatever else is going on. And tomorrow's newsletter, I'm going to be talking about this new study about honeycomb. The people contacted me that wrote this paper about it because they saw my video and they wanted to take the photo. They wanted to know if I could give them like the high res photo from the video, and they included that in their study. And it's an interesting study just about honeycomb and the assumption that bees are making honeycomb because it's the best use of space as well as the least amount of materials. And according to them, they do not think this is true. There's actually a better way to use less wax and still build a proper cell size that the brood can grow in. Um, so I'm going to have that in the toolkit in my newsletter tomorrow. If you're looking for some stupid stories, inspirational quotes, rambling of mine, I hope you check out the newest video I just put out on YouTube. It's called like Tales of a Beekeeper. And it's really just a lot of the stories of my 12 years beekeeping in Philly and Hawaii. Tomorrow, I'm putting out a video about my first month as a beekeeper, and I'm just putting in a ton of things. I'm making pollen patties. I made syrup in the video. I talk about installing bees, and I talk about some tricks to get your bees um, to build and not use up too many resources when you're first putting them in the hive. So that'll be tomorrow. And so, first, before I talk about this honey test, a bunch of people have been asking me about swapping their boxes. And that is a thing that some people say that they do around the springish time because you put your bees in the hive and they're probably in the bottom and then they make their way up, and then around now that bottom box is empty and the bees are up at the top and the queen's now starting to lay, and you'll have this empty brood box down below. So oftentimes beekeepers will swap those boxes because bees tend to go up. You have an empty box in the bottom, they're not necessarily going to go down and fill that up. um I mean, they can, but oftentimes beekeepers will swap the boxes, but like when do you do that is a big question that people have. So the way I do it, this isn't necessarily the best way. I don't know. But what I do is I don't have like a specific time that I would be swapping the boxes. I wait until it's warm enough that you can open the hive, and I take the box off when you can and it's empty. And then I wouldn't put that empty box back on until that first brood box needs it. And it looks like it's packed in there. So you're going to wait till you have like a warm day that you can take the lid off and the inner cover and take off that bottom box when you can. And then don't worry about putting that next box on until just like you did when you were first getting started, until you see that the bees need space and you can throw it back on. I don't really get any more complicated than that. I don't really have a specific time of year that like I'm going to do this. But maybe ask me again next year because Uh, this is my first time in a while in Pennsylvania, so we'll see how everything goes. All right, so honey. Honey has enzymes in it, and it's a well-known source of enzymatic antioxidants. Um, it has these compounds. There's compounds in honey that contribute to the antioxidant properties in honey, and the amount of antioxidant properties in honey really depends on the floral source and other environmental factors and the season. But there's a lot of benefits of honey and these enzymes that are found in honey. I'm going to put in links, as I mentioned it, in the comments to different studies. And then once we're done, I'll throw them in the video description for you guys that aren't live with us. But there's antibacterial benefits of honey. And this is mostly due to the hydrogen peroxide concentration, the higher sugar concentration, and the low pH level of honey. Hydrogen peroxide producing honeys are used in wound and burn dressings, either alone or in a combination with other medicines. There's antifungal properties of honey. It's used in topical treatments for things like athlete's foot and nail fungus and ringworm. There's potentially antiviral properties of honey, anti-inflammatory properties of honey. Some people use it for oral health. People use it for skin conditions. Just a mild, like a very simple mixture of honey, oil, like olive oil, avocado oil, and a small amount of beeswax. It can really help to treat skin conditions like eczema, um, and really help moisturize dry skin, especially in the winter months when the air is very dry and it locks in your body's natural moistures, which is mostly due to the beeswax. So this guy sent me a honey test from Spain, and it measures the activity of bee enzymes in the honey. And what you do is you take 4 ounces of water and I think it's like a tablespoon of honey, 4 ounces of clean water, and 1 teaspoon of honey. And you mix it together and leave it in a dark place for 6 to 12 hours. And then you put in one of these strips and wait 20 seconds and then look at the color on the chart. So all of my honeys came back like negative enzymes. And I wanted to show you the honeys that I used. We have the Kirkland, which is Costco's brand of honey, US raw unfiltered honey in a plastic squeezy bottle. We have wild Welsh Mountain Apiaries raw orange blossom honey. And I got that when I was in Intercourse, Pennsylvania, an Amish town. I also got, here we go. This is pure unfiltered raw honey, goldenrod aster milkweed, product of northern Pennsylvania. 1 pound, $12. And this was from a farm stand at a farm in Lancaster. And then I got, well, it's backwards for you guys. Sorry. It's upside down. There we go. Subi pure honey. If you guys aren't familiar with Subi, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's how a lot of beekeepers make their money. It's a honey co-op in the mainland. And even the farm I worked for in Hawaii, they used to sell barrels of their honey to Subi for a very low price, and they just put it in a big vat and heat it up and kill everything in there and heavily filter it and then put it in jars. They are not, claiming that this is raw or unfiltered or anything. It just says that it's from honey producers in the US and that it's a honey co-op. It's been around for over 100 years. And that's that. It doesn't say anything about it being mixture. It doesn't say anything about it having corn syrup and stuff in it. Okay, so I asked the guy why my honey test didn't work. And there are different ways to test honey. Ultimately, I think the real way to determine whether your honey has any enzymes alive in it is to send it to a lab to get tested. But there are a lot of ways that you can be destroying your honey. I wanted to talk about. One is by heating it up, which is something I think a lot of us know. So, according to a research study, like a one time short term heating of honey to 131 Fahrenheit or 55 Celsius hardly affects the enzyme activity. So, you can actually add your honey to warm milk or not like super hot tea, and it's actually perfectly acceptable, and you're not killing a lot of the enzymes in your honey, which I've actually been telling people that when you put honey in your hot tea, you're killing the enzymes, but that's not necessarily the case. You just wait until your tea is not like boiling hot and it's to the temperature that you're going to be drinking it, and then you still get those beneficial enzymes. In fact, enzymes become more active in warm honey. So it's actually better for you to use those like remedies of adding warm milk with honey for colds and to help your throat, and it actually will work. But when you're really killing the enzymes is like on really high heating, over 131, or the like heating it for a really long period of time, or the repeated heating is what deactivates the enzymes. So, like that company I worked for, they stored their honey in barrels. It held about 650-ish pounds of honey. And then they would put this giant blanket around the barrel, just like I do around 5-gallon buckets. And if you do this once and then pour it into jars, that's maybe not a big deal. But in order to really liquefy that honey in that huge barrel, you're probably heating it up for a really long period of time. I didn't spend much time in the honey production, the honey packing part of the company. There's a lot of P's in that sentence. But so I don't know how long they had to keep that blanket on. I believe it was overnight. But when you heat up your honey for that extended period of time so that you're heating up like a really large barrel of it, that's when you can kill the enzymes in honey. Or other farm I worked on, they had a very big freezer that maybe it was a refrigerator freezer. It was like the double doors, and they took out all of the shelving. They put in a light with a thermostat, a light bulb with a thermostat, and they used this old refrigerator or freezer, whatever it was, as a place to store their honey and keep it liquid. So they just had stacks of buckets, 5-gallon buckets of honey in this thing. And whenever we needed to bottle it, we just pull it out and bottle it. But then the one day I went to go bottle it and it was like dark, looking like molasses. And when I tried it, it was disgusting. And all of the buckets of honey in there had gone bad. So if you're going to do something like that, you want to not leave it in there staying warm until you need it. You want to just turn it on until you're ready to bottle it, and not do that to every single bucket. Just do it to the buckets that you need to warm up while you're pouring your honey. So it's the reheating, the constant reheating of honey, and heating it up at really high temperatures. That's what kills the and can kill the enzymes in honey. It can also kill the bacteria yeast that can cause the not so good fermentation of honey. So that's why a lot of these places will also do it. They're not just heating it up so that they can liquefy it and get it into these bottles, but they want to kill the yeast so that their honey doesn't ferment and go bad. So one way, as like, someone that's buying honey, if you want to make sure that your honey wasn't heated up too many times, you buy honey that supposedly was harvested within the last couple months, and you don't have to worry about that so much, most likely. But another thing along the lines of heating your honey up too much is that people use a hot knife to uncap the cells. I don't know if a lot of hobby beekeepers use them. I don't use them with my personal honey, but they do at the larger farms. And when you use these hot knives, this actually is heated to a pretty high temperature so that it can cut through that beeswax really easily. And that can also destroy enzymes in the honey in the process. Another way, you're not destroying the enzymes in honey, but you're going to cut down on the amount of enzymes in your honey is by harvesting a lot of honey that's not totally ripe. So when the bees add enzymes to the honey, and when you harvest a lot of honey that doesn't have a capping over the cells, you are taking honey that is going to have a lot more moisture in it and can potentially not have as many enzymes from the bees in it. Now, in terms of this statement, I do not have any any anything from any scientific papers and stuff to prove or disprove this. But it is really good to make sure that you are not harvesting honey that too much uncapped honey. And that is one reason. Now, an interesting thing I read in a bee culture article written by Bob Binney, I believe, who, if you haven't checked out his YouTube channel, you should, because he knows a lot about beekeeping, to say the least. Here is the link to that article. And what it's about is moisture content in honey and high humidity. Now, I definitely know about high humidity and harvesting honey. I did not deal too badly with having my honey ferment. It did not happen too often, but in areas with high humidity and high rainfall, having a high moisture content in the honey lowers the quality and can lead to fermentation. Honey is hygroscopic, which means it absorbs moisture from a high humidity environment. And honey is hydrophilic, which means that it will release moisture when there's low humidity. So, a continual exposure to 80% humidity, the moisture content in honey can rise to like 33%. When exposed to 50% humidity, it'll lower to about 16%, which is crazy. That is a huge change. And if I knew that, I would not have harvested honey on those rainy days in Hawaii. Um, 60% humidity, it's balanced out to about 18.3%. So the bees in the hive keep the humidity level at about 50 to 60% humidity. And that is actually perfect for making sure that the moisture content isn't too high. So, if you are in a high humidity environment, doing things like transporting, storing, bottling your honey is actually going to increase the moisture content in your honey. Um, I do not use a refractometer, which is a way to measure the moisture content in your honey. If I had known this, I probably would have. But to be honest, I'm not going to do these things. Like what Bob Binney says that he did, this article is like over 5 years old, but he says that he put supers in a warm, low humidity drying room to allow surface area to be affected by the warm, dry, moving air. And if you want to remove moisture, you simply raise the temperature in a space, and that will drop the humidity level and increase the drying effect. I mean, like in Hawaii, there's no way to uh, increase the temperature. There's no, I mean, I guess they could have bought heaters, space heaters, if I wanted to, but there was no way to keep my house otherwise. And, just having like the fans going and stuff and dehumidifiers can really help to lower that moisture content before you're bottling. But of course, if you're not in a high humidity area, then this might not be a problem. But even here in Pennsylvania, it's dry now, but come summertime, the humidity actually gets to a point that it is stifling and way worse than I experienced in Hawaii. So, um, just one more thing about this is that you need to, when it comes to keeping your honey from fermenting, if you have a high moisture content in your honey, it can lead your honey to ferment. But honey with a low moisture content can also ferment if it has a lot of yeast in it. So, you really just want everything to be as clean as possible when harvesting your honey. Yeast is everywhere. But even honey that you think had a low moisture content can ferment if it was just exposed to all of this yeast. All right, so back to things that can kill enzymes in honey. Another thing is you don't want to feed bees sugar syrup when you have your honey supers on, or you don't want to harvest those frames that might have been in the hive when you were feeding your bees syrup, because that's going to decrease the amount of enzymes in your honey. Um, bees aren't going to that syrup that the bees put in the cells is not going to have enzymes in it. I don't believe, even though the bees all do add enzymes to nectar. But either way, you really don't want to be feeding your bees when you have frames on that you're going to be harvesting. Another thing that I actually did not know, but I have a link here I'm going to put in the comments to an article from the National Library of Medicine, is light and how that affects your honey. So inside the hive, it's dark, and bees seal their honey in the combs with this opaque wax. And this honey is just like sealed up, like you're closing up a can, like the honey in those tombs in Egypt, that honey was still good, it hadn't fermented. But one thing that can destroy the enzymes in honey is light. And so, since most honey is sold in plastic bottles and clear glass jars, that is something to keep in mind. Or you're selling your honey at the farmer's market and you're putting it all out on the table. You'll see that Manuka honey uh, is sold in dark jars if you go online to buy any. And so, according to the study, exposure to sunlight for 10 days decreased the antioxidant capacity. And the antioxidant capacity began to decrease after 6 days. So that study is right there. I just saw one person said, "Can you save fermented honey?" As far as I'm aware, you cannot. There is really, once it's fermented, you cannot unferment honey. The yeast has gone too far. And so when you're storing your honey, try to keep it out of sunlight. When you're pulling it out of the hives, at that time, it's at least under the beeswax cappings. But try to keep your jars out of sunlight or find jars that are darker in color. The next thing that can cause the enzymes in honey to go bad is the contact with metals. Um, right. That was also in that Bee Culture magazine article. So, bee enzymes interact not only with glucose, but also with certain metals like iron and copper. Almost all honey is extracted from combs using metal extractors. Even food grade stainless steel contains a lot of metal impurities that weaken bee enzymes. So, After extraction, the honey is stored a lot of these places, and the big places are putting their honey in large metal barrels, and that's just terrible for the enzymes of the honey. People used to put them in barrels made of wood, and so in these metal barrels, the enzymes react with the metal and weaken. Because of its acidity, honey reacts with steel, iron, aluminum, galvanized metal, copper, tin, and other metals. It produces toxins and can affect the taste and color. Steel and iron are especially bad for honey storage because they can rust. So I really hate putting honey in those canning jars for this reason. The mason jars, the ones with the metal lids, because you can get plastic lids, but that's just another extra cost. There are a lot of honey jars that come with lids that start to rust, actually. But in Hawaii, I really found that the mason jar lid started to rust pretty fast. And that just is really bad for the honey. Makes it taste, can add to the taste, make it taste kind of gross. Um, Two exceptions to the storage of honey and metal is gold and silver. If you wanted to make a gold barrel for your honey. But for most of us, we're going to just want food grade stainless steel, food, US grade A fancy. It's free of defects and may not contain particles that affect the clarity. And then plastic releases toxins. So you only want food grade plastic. It's PETE plastic is what you want. And when you're looking on the bottom, you see that triangle with the arrows. You want a number one in that triangle. And that's just good. I don't know how many toxins are being released when you're just harvesting, but when you are even doing like a crush and strain method and stuff like that and harvesting, you really want that food grade plastic. You want that number one on those containers that you're putting everything in. And when it comes to like just taking frames out and just putting them in some kind of bin to carry them to the house, I don't really think that matters so much. But when you are like squishing everything and putting the honey directly into the plastic, you should really make sure that you're using the proper plastic. All right. And finally, there is oxidation. This one, I have not found anything to support or contradict. But the place that makes this honey test says that um, oxygen can cause honey to lose its medicinal properties. I don't know if that is the case, but he says that if honeycomb is spun in an extractor, it's under the force of the centrifuge and then just, spins it really fast and you will see lots of bubbles in your honey. And he says the honey flows out in a thin stream into the extractor, and this thin stream oxidizes with oxygen and causes the honey to lose medicinal properties. And you, of course, want to store your honey in tightly sealed jars without access to air. You really want your containers to have that gasket seal on them. You don't want to just be putting them in any kind of bucket. So here is a link to one more study, biochemical reactions and their biological contributions in honey. So that is what I wanted to talk to you guys about when harvesting and storing honey. Now, maybe you don't care, and that is totally fine. To be honest, I don't even know if I care. But I think I have the flu. So I'm a little tired at the moment. I'll think about this later. But it is going to make me think twice about some of the things I do with my honey. Definitely the light, the sunlight is something I did not know much about, and I'm going to be way more cautious when it comes to leaving my honey, like where I'm storing it. Um, and if you're going to sell at the farmer's market, you should really be considerate of where your honey is and not having like so many jars out in the bright sun, because there's really only so much protection from the sun you can give them when you're at a farmer's market in the summertime. Okay. So I wanted to get to some of the comments since it's 8:36 and answer questions you guys might have. Anthony says next 7 days here in Wisconsin will be above 50. Yes, it's supposed to be 65 next week one day. So exciting. And yeah, that's a good point. Let's get these bees fed. This is a really common time for bees to starve to death because since it is so warm out, they are using up a lot of energy. Queen is laying, which means they need to keep the hive warm at that like 92 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. And so this is a time that the bees can starve to death. So really check on them and make sure that they have enough food. Karen's from Rockport. Cheryl says snowed all afternoon here. It is lovely though when the snow is on the trees. Connecticut and Houston, Texas, Arkansas, South Africa, Southern California, Harrisburg, New Hampshire, Knoxville, Southern Mississippi, Texas, Kentucky. Yes, I did the artwork. Thank you. And Wisconsin. Cheryl says, Ohio, 8 hives down to 3, still learning. This will be my 4th year. 3 hives from 8 is not bad, honestly, in nature. Roughly 30% of the hives make it. So when you're first getting started and you're just getting these new genetics and stuff, there not every hive is going to be all that great. So if you can get honestly your first few years, if you can just get 1 or 2 hives to survive so that you can start splitting them and breeding from them and making sure that you understand all the parts to keeping them through winter and they're not like starving to death and freezing or not being able to cluster because of mites, then you're good. I would consider that an accomplishment. Um, Sten Honey Farm says we have the African honeybee here. I also think I need to write books on beekeeping from Africa. They are extremely defensive. I don't know if I actually would keep bees if I had to deal with extremely defensive bees because it does not sound like fun. I don't know. I'd really have to give it a try, but it's I don't know. It sounds hard to be able to keep going when they are so angry. Donald says it was 55 degrees this week for a few days and my bees were out collecting pollen. Does pollen stay on plants throughout the winter months? Interesting. I mean, it definitely could have frozen, but I would think that over the winter the flowers would have fallen off. Um, that's really interesting. I'm like, is my guess would be that there must be something that's popping up already, like some little weeds or something that they're finding pollen in. Otherwise, then I guess there must have been some flowers that just froze and they're gathering pollen. Hopefully it's not moldy. That was the issue in Hawaii was bees would bring back moldy pollen. Junebug says, what determines the color of honey? I thought there was some pollen mixed in with the honey contributing to the color, but pollen color charts don't match my honey's color. Interesting. Well, yeah, pollen does contribute to the color. And then there's also just the nectar. Some nectar is just like really high in glucose, some is high in fructose. Um, uh, I mean, you have like The Lehua, I mean, I've seen some really dark honeys. Like the MacNut honey is really dark. It looks like maple syrup, and the pollen is nowhere near as dark as that. I mean, most pollen you see is like yellow, orangey, maybe a reddish color. So it definitely contributes to it. But I think like the things that are in it, the sugars that are in it, is what also contributes to the color. But I am not positive about that. I do not know a ton about all that is in honey other than what I just mentioned. My bee club had somebody give a talk about honey and the tastes and the color wheel. Um, I think a lot of it is just the color of the nectar. Like they were saying that they were finding blue honey in hives, and they found that the bees were going to the M&M factory and gathering blue syrup. So it doesn't really matter how much pollen is in there from the other honeys if there's nectar that is blue that's being added in. And a lot of it gets mixed together. You might think that your honey is mostly like this nectar, but I'm sure they're going to a lot of different flowers when it's all getting brought in. Bobby says, "What is your favorite flavor of honey?" The silver oak was my absolute favorite that I harvested in Hawaii. It had a really fruity flavor to it, and I loved it. It was so delicious. There was only one yard that I ever was able to harvest a silver oak from. My other bee yards did not bring this in at all. It The tree has these leaves that are like the shape of, or it has these flowers that like look like flames. They like are this yellowy orange. It is really crazy looking. They say that the neck something of the silver oak is like poisonous. I'll put a link into what the silver oak flowers look like. They're really interesting, but I had one bee yard that had a bunch of silver oak there. And and then I moved a yard a half a mile down the road, and there was like a whole field of silver oak right there. And when I moved the bees there, like a few weeks later, they had cut down every single tree and they were building a house on the property. It was so disappointing. Other than that, I really like the mesquite honey. It's called Kiave in Hawaii. It's very mild in flavor, really sweet, kind of tastes like vanilla icing. I've had a really good variation of it where the Rare Hawaiian Honey Company mixes peppermint with it, and it's really delicious. Kenny says he swapped his boxes last week in Tennessee. 4 hives all made it through the winter. Yeah, so Tennessee, you guys are already warming up. That's where we get our bees from when you buy packages in Pennsylvania, because they're already getting up and running. So you guys, where it's still cold out, if it's too cold to open the hives, you don't have to worry about this yet. Ronald says, what temperature minimum before removing the inner cover? Um, so if it's 65 or below, they're still clustered up. You don't want to be bothering them then. You want it to be like over that temperature, and ideally like no wind and nice sunshine, seeing bees coming and going. That's when you can remove that inner cover and peek down in there. Um, and peek at first, look under there, and if it looks good, they're active, then you can take it off and check in on them. Bobby wants to know where my passion of bees came from. Honestly, I have no idea. I just a friend of mine suggested we keep bees, and I thought she was crazy, but she showed me a website where we that showed you like how to become a beekeeper, and then I just thought it was really cool and got some books, and it's just bees, I guess, made me passionate about bees. They're so interesting. Sometimes you meet somebody and they're kind of boring you don't really have much to talk about and you're just like hi hi and you move on, and then other times you meet someone and there's just like a never ending conversation. That's like how I feel like about bees. Every time I read a book there's like something new that's interesting to learn about, and that's really where that passion comes from. Junebug says if honey crystallizes and you warm it until it's gone, will the honey recrystallize again later? Yes, it will. um, So you're going to have to continue to warm it up. And that's like, and when I was talking about how you can heat something up for a short period of time and it's fine, you're really killing the enzymes when you just continue to reheat it. And that's what some of these honey packing places do. They will like heat up this barrel for like over and over again, because they might not be using all of the honey from it, and that's when you really start to kill the enzymes. Either that or you just heat the barrel up for like 2 days waiting for it to liquefy. But uh, that's where the tricky part. I was selling comb honey. I didn't like to sell at farmers markets the comb honey because once it's crystallized, nobody wants to buy it because you can't see the comb and it's really hard to get out. So I only sold comb honey to the honey packing place. And once it would crystallize, I would only liquefy the honey that I was selling. And I never sold them more than 4 cases. Actually, I never sold them more than 10 cases at a time. And that seemed to be the point. They started to sell a lot of it. And so I just started at 4 cases and then increased it to more and more. But I never wanted to sell them too much at a time because I didn't want the honey to crystallize again and have to liquefy it again. I put my honey, I took like a old refrigerator and put a light bulb and a thermostat in there, a mini fridge, and I would liquefy like a couple cases at a time. You really just don't want to keep reheating it, even if it's just for your own personal consumption. But it will keep recrystallizing. John says you can heat honey to 40 Celsius to decrystallize at 42 max. It will recrystallize eventually. Fall honey, especially. Here, oh, not here, but in Hawaii, the best honey for the comb honey, because you really don't want that to crystallize, is the Brazilian pepper tree. That one had a higher sucrose level and it did not crystallize very fast. It took quite a while to crystallize. Um, the lehua honey and mesquite honey crystallizes really fast. Like you can potentially have the honey crystallize in the frames, still in the hive, if you don't harvest it soon enough. And so it helps you just get to know what kind of honey is in your area. It can be tricky, but going to farmers markets, going to your bee club meetings, talking to other beekeepers, seeing what's in your area all helps to this. And because certain honeys have different levels of sucrose to glucose and will crystallize shorter or faster. M. Smith says, when using a double screen setup, smashing, filtering your honey, what is the easiest way of cleaning out the wax out of the screen? Oh, I feel like you can never get the wax out of those screens. I mean, hot water on the opposite side is what I use for my filters. Other people, they use strainers that are disposable and they throw them away. I mean, paint strainers is something that I've seen used a lot, but that's not really food grade, so I don't like to use it. I use metal strainers, and then I just wash it with really hot water on the underside to get it out. And there's just always going to be the tiniest little wax residue, I think, forever. That's why you're never supposed to use your good kitchen stuff while harvesting honey, because you're never going to fully get the beeswax off of any of it. John says fans help a lot, but if the humidity is high, the honey will absorb the water. To be safe, I use a dehumidifier and a refractometer. Um, yeah, I mean, you really just, ideally, you don't want to harvest on those high humidity days. Even in a really humid climate, you have days when the humidity is going to be higher, it's pouring outside. So dehumidifiers, a combination of dehumidifiers, fans, and just making the heat inside the room, just making it warmer inside the room will help. And it's the transporting, the bottling, all of that stuff that's done to the honey during the high humidity times. But a refractometer, if you live in these high humidity environments, can be helpful, but not necessary if you're not like selling your honey. Sometimes it goes bad, and it's just like that learning curve that just happens sometimes. Um, Mr. McLibtard says, "Can you say fermented honey?" I already mentioned that question. No, you cannot. Can I boil it and feed it back to my bees? I would not feed fermented honey to the bees. I don't believe boiling it will make it okay. And you know what? Like when feeding bees, if you're going to boil honey to kill any beneficial enzymes in it, you might as well just buy, spend $2 for a 4 pound bag of sugar and just make some syrup, is the way that I look at it. You can leave it out if you want and see if bees take it. I had read a while ago that it is bad for bees to feed them fermented honey. Bees can get nosema, they can get spores in their digestive tract, and that can cause a hive to collapse. So, there are things you can feed bees that you can put in syrup to help them prevent nosema and help them with um, digestion. But I wouldn't really mess with it, to be honest. Stan Honey Farm says, "When my honey ferments, we turn it into mead. Delicious." Yeah, that's something I've never tried. So you'll have to write a book about the North African bees and how to make mead, because that is something I know very little about. And I feel like not a lot of people have talk about those parts of beekeeping. Gene Williams says, "Hi from Northern California, Redwoods, Bohemian Estates, Emerald Triangle." Oh, Chuck says, "Refrigeration of honey. Is it bad for the honey?" So you have different things you can do to your honey. We have freezing honey, which is something I used to do. I used to put my honeycomb in the freezer to slow down the crystallization process so that I wouldn't have to heat it up, especially the chunks of honey in a case. That does slow down the crystallization of honey. It won't totally prevent it, but it does slow it down. However, when you pull it out, there's condensation on the outside. So make sure that container is sealed very well, and you do not have any labeling on it. You put the labeling afterwards because the label will fall off when it gets wet. Then you have the heating up of honey, which we've already talked about. And yeah, I think it's like 130 so degrees Fahrenheit, and your honey is safe. You don't have to heat it. You can heat it up a little bit, and you're not going to kill the enzymes in it. I really heat my honey up. I think I have my hot box to like 110 max, but I do have comb in my honey. So once you hit 110, the comb will melt. So it does take longer to liquefy the honey, but I don't want to melt the comb. But then you can put the honey in the refrigerator. And the farm I worked for, they actually sealed up a room in the warehouse and put air conditioners in there to simulate, refrigerator temperature. And this was to accelerate the crystallization process. They did this only with their lehua honey, which already crystallized very fast. So they would the lehua season was like the crazy time of year. They would harvest the honey, pull it off the hives very fast before it would crystallize in the frames, in the comb. And then as soon as they pulled it off the hives, they would immediately bottle it. They did not put it into a barrel. And then once it was in bottles, they put it into the refrigerated room, the air conditioned room. And when you do this, you increase the crystallization process. So the faster honey crystallizes, usually the smaller the grains and of the crystals in your honey, which is beneficial because now you have like a spreadable honey. And for this honey, it's already crystallizing really fast. So they didn't have to put it in the cool room for very long. And they had this really lovely spreadable honey that, tasted delicious, and it was like icing. So you put honey in the refrigerator, you are increasing the speed at which your honey is going to crystallize. Not all honeys are going to crystallize, really fast. Like the Brazilian pepper tree honey, but for the mesquite, which is the most common tree in the United States, and lehua tree, which is probably one of the least common trees in the United States, it's going to help quite a bit. Telmar, thank you for the sponsorship. And in South Carolina, when should I add on a super? Well, it depends if you're using deeps. If you are using two deeps, then you just add that first deep on once. You're always adding boxes on once there is little to no room in the uppermost box. So once your first box has like about 8 frames that are filled out and you only have 2 that are empty, then you add another box on top. And once that second box is mostly filled up and you only have a couple frames empty, like 2 or 3, then you add the next box on top. And that's when you're adding all of your boxes on top. It's just that there is this like second part of the process, which is the lower boxes. If you want to prevent swarming, you're going to have to continue to take frames out of all of your boxes so that none of them are totally full. You don't want any of your brood boxes to have no empty frames and nowhere for the queen to lay, nowhere for the bees to build comb, or else they're going to start the swarming process. And if you're okay with that, then that's fine. But if you're not, you're going to want to take these frames and you're going to want to put them, make another beehive, or you can use the Demaree method. I will put in the chat how to spell that. And that is a method to control swarming that you're essentially taking those frames and putting them where your honey supers are in another brood box with a queen excluder in between so the queen can't get up there. Once the bees hatch, then you have these frames are all empty. And then you can put them back down where your brood is. Whenever you add an empty box onto your beehive, whether it is a super or a box for your brood, I like to put frames from the lower boxes inside so it's not totally empty and you're not putting 10 empty frames on your box because the bees can be slow to go up there, depending on if they need the space or not. So if the box below it has the same size frame, say you're adding that second brood box on, take some frames of brood and a frame of honey and put it in that new box you're putting on top. Take empty frames from the new box you're putting on top, put it in the box that you already have on your hive. And then you're doing 2 things. You're encouraging the bees to move up to this empty space you've added, and you're providing space in that lower section for the queen to do her thing. When you add an empty honey super on top, then that can be tricky. And that's why I just have always had a chest freezer. Don't have a chest freezer yet. Working on it. But even a second fridge, even if it's not a great fridge, a second fridge in your garage or a broken chest freezer that has a gasket on it that's still in good condition when you have empty frames from any of your hives from the year before, just store them. First, freeze them in case there's anything living in there, and then put it in an empty, broken chest freezer that is clean and doesn't have anything living in there, and store them there until you need them. And you can always put them in your honey super, some of those frames from last year. If you don't have it because you're new to beekeeping, then it's not a requirement, but always having something, even if it's empty, but just some beeswax, will really help move those bees into your empty boxes. 84 in Fredericksburg, Texas today. I am so jealous. I do miss the days of 80s. I will say though, I really love springtime weather. It was 50s and it felt so refreshing. I really got tired of the heat in Hawaii. It just never seemed to end. November, I hated November so much. It just never seemed to end, the heat, and it would still be hot November, December. I love the sweater weather. I like it when it's a little bit cooler out. Karen says, how do you know if the honey has fermented? Signs your honey has fermented, that's a great question. Is it actually can be quite strong. It produces gas, and you will see bubbling up at the top sometimes. And when you take the lid off, just like if you were to open yogurt that's gone bad and it like pops, your honey will like release this gas. And then it also usually tastes like beer or like alcohol is in there. Though I've had some honeys that kind of taste like beer, but they didn't ferment. They just kind of had this funny bitter taste to them. The main one is um, the psst, when you open it up, you know something's wrong. Sharon says, can you freeze your honey once in jars? Yes, you can, but just don't put a label on it because when you take it out, it's going to have that condensation on it. And make sure those jars have a good seal on them so that moisture isn't getting inside. But that can slow down the crystallization process. Dominican beekeeper, greetings from the Caribbean. M. Smith says, thanks for that. I guess I just bought my wife a new crock pot from warming my honey. Nam Chi Vu, oh, she knows mead. So that is somebody to talk to about mead making. I do not know much about mead making, but she has done quite a bit of it. Bennett says, can you treat with Formic Pro too early? Well, you don't want to treat with Formic when it's so cold out that you're like bothering the bees when they're still clustered up. Uh, I usually don't like to treat until that first brood box is at least mostly full. Um, Formic, I don't know if it has temperature restrictions in terms of cold. It probably does. It definitely has temperature restrictions for the heat. When it comes to springtime treatments, I will. Apivar is a good one if you aren't specifically looking for organic. It's not always effective everywhere in the country. Some mites have developed a resistance to it, but since this is springtime, it's not the end of the world if that is the case. Um, Apagard is a good springtime treatment, and so are those new Viroxin. It's oxalic acid in the time release strips, or you can use the dribble method with oxalic acid. It's just you have to continue to do it since there's already brood present. But the extended release oxalic acid strips, Apavar, and Apagard, I would go with first before formic. And the only reason is this: you can use formic. It's just the formic is such a strong smell and it really can disrupt the queen's laying. And right now, it's really important for the queen to lay as much as possible. So I try to stay away from it, but it won't, most likely won't kill the bees. And if anything happens to the queen, because sometimes hives can go queenless when you use formic, especially if the queen is over a year old, then you have plenty of time to go get another one. But I wouldn't put that in until you have a good amount of brood. You have at least 6 frames of brood, because even though it is going to be in the hive for 6 weeks, you have a whole nother brood box that the bees have to fill out before you're putting honey supers on it. Or you can take it off a little bit sooner. Um, Marta says Demaree method, no link there, just a name. Yeah, I don't. There are a bunch of YouTube videos on how to do it. I don't really know of any off the top of my head. I know the Keeper's Hive YouTube channel has a video showing the Demaree method, because that's something they really recommend using their hive style. Um, but it's really just, I think all of the videos that you'll see on YouTube are sufficient to show you how to do it. Is not that complicated. You're really just putting them, you just need an extra brood box is the only caveat. Because you need to put them into a box up above your brood. Tomar says it's still around 60 degrees here, so I need to worry about swarming yet. um well, okay, so it depends on what you have on your beehive right now. If your beehive is 2 deeps, then you probably don't have to worry about swarming right now. If it's 60 degrees, if you have a day where it's pretty warm out and it's at least 65 out, you can swap your boxes. Just double check and make sure that your bees don't swarm. And that's about it. If you only have one single deep on your hive, then I would first just check the activity and sit outside the hive. If you're not really seeing a lot of bees coming and going, then I wouldn't worry about adding another hive. But definitely have another box ready and waiting with frames. And when you have a nice day that it's at least 65 Fahrenheit out and preferably sunny, just put that extra box on as soon as you can. I don't I mean, it's really hard to say just like what to definitely do without seeing the bees. But if you're not seeing a lot of activity and it's still, below the point that the bees are going to be freely coming and going from the hive, I wouldn't worry too much about swarming. Did they make it through the winter and they only have one deep, or are they a hive that you just recently got? I'm curious. All right. Well, it is 9:09. So I am going to head out because I need to take get to bed. um well, if they don't have a lot to eat for winter and you're adding the sugar, I would not add another deep on top, because you really want to make sure that they can access the sugar. And if you put another deep on top and then you put the sugar on top of that, I would be afraid that they're going to starve and not find that sugar that is now up above this empty box that you're putting on the hive. If you want, you can take an empty box and put it underneath. You don't have to take off the lid or anything. And you could probably do it when it's like, in the low 60s if it's warm out and you're seeing the bees flying around. But I wouldn't just put another box on top unless you're really seeing a lot of activity outside the hive. Because even if they do swarm, like personally, I would rather have my bees swarm than potentially have them starve to death because they can't access the food now. Um, so it is a little tricky because I can't really give you any definite answer, but I would leave them be until it is warmer out and you can really see what's going on. Uh, and make sure that they're getting to their food, and that's really the most important thing, is to keep giving them as much food as they need. And then when it's a little warmer out, you can add another box on top or on the bottom and make sure that they still can find that food. So thank you everybody for joining in. It's nice to see you all. um Thanks to Galena Farms for sponsoring this so that I can make some more money. YouTube advertising is okay, but it's not really a ton. And I will see you next month. And tomorrow I'll put out my new video about your first month as a beekeeper. Even if it is not your first month as a beekeeper, might want to check it out because I have a bunch of helpful tips for beekeeping in the springtime. I show how to make pollen patties and how to make one-to-one syrup, and how to encourage your bees to grow, checkerboarding, when to add supers on, what you're looking for in that first spring month when it's warm enough that they're coming and going, but not so warm out. But they're still just in one brood box. And check out my other video I put on this week about my beekeeping stories in Hawaii. I will put that in the link in the video description. I think it's funny that both videos I mention animals knocking over my beehives because they had to scratch and itch. What are the odds? All right. Good night, everybody.